What does silence sound like when it becomes your only companion? Is it a friend, gentle and familiar, or an echo that reminds you of everything that is missing? Eleanor Whitmore often asked herself this question as she walked through the quiet rooms of her wooden house by Willow Lake. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. At 74, she'd grown accustomed to stillness. It wasn't the vibrant kind of silence filled with possibilities, but the heavy sort that draped itself over chairs, photographs, and window panes like a winter blanket that never lifted. 5 years had passed since Thomas, her husband, had gone, and still the house felt like it belonged more to absence than to presence. Every morning followed the same rhythm. The tea kettle whistled, a high-pitched note piercing the hush. Eleanor would pour the steaming water over a tea bag, watch the color swirl into amber, and then carry her cup to the porch. From there, she could see the lake, frozen most of the winter, shimmering with faint ripples when the wind stirred. The water mirrored her own life, sometimes still, sometimes troubled, but always moving beneath the surface. Her neighbors in town called her resilient. "Strong woman," they'd say, patting her hand in the grocery store or after Sunday service. But strength, she knew, was a word people used when they couldn't imagine the cracks beneath someone's smile. Resilience to her felt less like courage and more like stubbornness, choosing to breathe, choosing to rise, choosing to keep the house warm when the world outside felt cold. The walls of the house carried her history. Photographs lined the hallway. Her children, Michael and Lily, frozen in moments of laughter and sunburned summers. Thomas in his fishing hat, grinning beside the lake. Eleanor herself, younger, eyes bright, hair catching the light like silver threads before their time. She touched those frames often, letting her fingertips rest where voices once had been. That evening, after a day spent pruning dead leaves from her indoor plants, Eleanor climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. She rarely went there. Dust, cobwebs, the smell of mothballs lingered, but something urged her to tidy the forgotten space. Perhaps it was the restlessness that comes at the end of February, when winter feels endless and one longs for renewal. The attic air was heavy with the scent of cedar and dust. Boxes leaned against one another like tired old men. She pulled open one labeled Christmas ornaments, finding tangled strings of lights that hadn't glowed in years. Another box contained children's books, spines faded, pages softened from bedtime hands, turning them over and over. And then she noticed it. A small wooden chest pushed into the corner, half hidden beneath an old quilt. Different from the cardboard boxes, this one was crafted, sturdy oak, polished long ago, though now dulled with time. A brass clasp kept it shut. Eleanor frowned. She didn't remember owning such a piece. Kneeling slowly, careful with her knees, she slid the chest toward her. Dust swirled up, catching the slant of the attic light. She brushed her palm across the lid, the way one might touch a stranger's shoulder, curious, cautious, reverent. When she lifted the clasp, it gave a faint metallic click. The lid creaked open, as though reluctant to reveal its contents. Inside lay a neat stack of envelopes, each sealed, each with her name written in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting. Her breath caught. Thomas. The name left her lips as a whisper, trembling. The handwriting had not faded. The ink was bold, steady. Some envelopes bore dates from decades past, 1975, 1989, 1997. Others were more recent. She picked one up, her fingers shaking as if holding something alive. For a long moment, she simply stared. Her heart raced with questions. Why had he written these? Why had he hidden them? Were they meant for her to find? Or were they secrets never meant to be uncovered? The house seemed to lean in around her, listening. The silence was no longer empty. It was charged, waiting. Eleanor pressed the envelope against her chest, closing her eyes. In that instant, the loneliness she had carried for years shifted, not vanishing, but softening. Somewhere between grief and discovery, hope stirred, a quiet, fragile hope, like the first bud pushing through frozen ground. She whispered again, but this time it was not a question. "I found you, Thomas." And with the box of hidden letters in her lap, the quiet house no longer felt so empty. Morning light slid through the curtains like golden ribbons, dust motes dancing in the beams. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the wooden box resting in front of her as though it carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Her teacup sat untouched, steam curling upward and vanishing into the stillness. She had not slept much. All night she had lain awake, the envelopes vivid in her mind, Thomas's handwriting etched behind her eyelids. At last, when the kettle whistled, she gathered her courage. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the first envelope, dated June 12, 1971. The paper crackled softly as she broke the seal. The scent of old ink rose faintly, mingling with the smell of tea. She unfolded the page, and there it was, Thomas's voice, alive again, threading through her memory as if he sat across the table, smiling with those steady brown eyes. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this someday, I hope it is because you have found this box and chosen to remember not just the man I became, but the boy who first loved you. I write this tonight, in our tiny apartment with the leaky faucet, while you sleep with your hand curled beneath your cheek. Do you know how peaceful you look? I don't have much to give you yet, no big house, no shining car, but I promise you this, as long as I breathe, I will walk beside you, even through the lean years. You once told me love is not about grand gestures, but about keeping the fire lit no matter how small the flame. I will keep it burning, Eleanor, always." Her hand pressed to her lips. She could almost hear the squeak of that old faucet, dripping endlessly into the sink. She saw herself at 21, hair tied back, folding laundry in that cramped little apartment above the bakery. They had so little then, thin curtains, mismatched plates, nights when supper was just bread and butter. And yet, her heart swelled with the warmth of those early days. Tears blurred her vision. She read the letter again, slower this time, savoring each line like a familiar melody. She had forgotten how young and hopeful Thomas's words could be, how they carried no weight of responsibility, only the lightness of devotion. Leaning back, Eleanor let her eyes wander around the kitchen. The oak cabinets, the ceramic bowls, the ticking clock on the wall, all of it had once been new, all of it earned little by little, year by year. She remembered the smell of fresh paint when they moved into their first real house, the pride in Thomas's eyes when he fixed their second-hand car, the laughter when Michael was born and cried so loudly the neighbors knocked on their door. The memories came rushing, not as sorrow this time, but as soft warmth, like a quilt stitched together from scraps of old fabric, uneven, imperfect, yet beautiful because of the love sewn in. Her thoughts drifted to her children. Michael, now grown, distant, his calls infrequent. Lily, her sweet girl, gone too soon, leaving behind silence that no letter could fill. Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered, "If only you could read these with me, Michael. You'd remember the man your father was, the man who loved us both so deeply." The lake wind rattled the window, as if echoing her words. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and held it against her chest. Then she reached for the second letter. Its date read October 3rd, 1975. Her heart beat faster. She hesitated, sensing that each page she opened would carry her deeper, not just into Thomas's love, but into the river of years they had shared, years both tender and turbulent. For a long while she sat in stillness, the second letter unopened, her tea now cold. A small smile touched her lips. "One at a time," she whispered. I want to hear your voice slowly, Thomas. I want this to last. She returned the envelopes to the box, except for the first, which she left on the table beside her cup. Its presence felt like company, like a conversation waiting to continue. Outside, the lake glittered under the morning sun. Eleanor watched the light ripple across the surface and thought of Thomas's promise, keeping the fire lit, no matter how small the flame. Her heart answered softly, "The flame is still here, Thomas. It never left." The second envelope lay on the table all morning, quietly daring Eleanor to open it. She busied herself with small tasks, watering the ferns, polishing the silver frame that held their wedding photograph, reheating yesterday's soup. Yet her eyes always drifted back to the letter. Finally, when the clock chimed noon, she gave in. The paper felt fragile, softer than the first, as if age had seeped into its fibers. The date read October 3rd, 1975. She unfolded it carefully, her breath shallow. "My Eleanor, I write tonight after another long day at the factory. My hands ache, but my heart is restless with words I never say out loud. I know you worry about money, about bills piling up, about the way I come home, tired and quiet. But let me tell you what carries me through. It's the sound of your laughter in the kitchen, the way you hum while stirring soup, the warmth of your hand on mine as we fall asleep in that little bed. Life feels heavy sometimes, but with you, it always feels possible. I want you to know, even in our struggles, I am proud of us, proud of this life we are building. It may not shine from the outside, but inside, Eleanor, it glows. I see it every time I look at you." Eleanor's throat tightened. She could see it all again. The narrow house they had scraped enough money to buy, the squeaky screen door, the patched sofa they'd found at a yard sale. Those were lean years, when paychecks seemed to vanish before they arrived, when storms rattled the roof and she worried if it would hold. But oh, how alive those days had been. She remembered standing in the kitchen on crisp autumn evenings, stirring a pot of stew, humming without even realizing it. And Thomas would appear in the doorway, weary from work, his shirt smelling faintly of oil and sawdust. He'd wrap his arms around her from behind, rest his chin on her shoulder, and in that embrace all the worries seemed smaller. Her lips curved into a smile, bittersweet. "You did glow, Thomas," she murmured. "Even in the dark, you always glowed." The letter had unlocked more than memory. It had opened the door to forgotten sensations. She remembered the creak of floorboards under hurried footsteps, the sting of cold air when the furnace faltered, the sweet relief of hot tea after a long day. Life was hard then, yes, but every hardship had been softened by togetherness. She closed her eyes and let the images flood her. Michael as a toddler, chasing a wooden toy across the rug. Lily's giggles echoing in the bathtub. Thomas sitting at the table, fixing a loose chair leg with steady hands while singing softly under his breath. A sudden ache swelled in her chest, not just grief, but longing for that version of herself, young and resilient, full of energy she no longer possessed. She whispered into the quiet kitchen, "Where did the years go so quickly?" Her voice trembled, but she did not cry. Instead, she traced Thomas's words on the page, as if by touching them she could feel the warmth of his hands again. Later, she carried the letter to the porch. The air was crisp and the lake shone silver under the pale autumn sun. She sat in her wicker chair, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders, and began to read the letter aloud. Her voice, thin but steady, filled the air. She imagined the trees listening, the water holding the sound, carrying it across the ripples. When she finished, a silence settled that felt less lonely, more sacred, as though the lake itself had absorbed Thomas's words. For the first time in years, Eleanor laughed softly, half a sob, half a chuckle. "You'd be proud of me, Thomas." I kept going. Even when it was hard, even when I felt the fire fading, I tried to keep it lit. The wind stirred, gentle, almost like a hand brushing against her cheek. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe, if only for a heartbeat, that it was Thomas answering her. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. 2 envelopes now opened, countless more waiting, each promising another piece of him, another fragment of their life together. Eleanor pressed her palms flat against the lid of the box, whispering into the stillness, "Don't leave me yet. I'm not ready for silence again." And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't answer back. The afternoon light was fading, a golden haze spilling across the floorboards, when Eleanor lifted another envelope from the box. She noticed something different at once. Her name was not written on the front. Instead, in Thomas's careful hand, it read, "For Michael." Her breath caught. Her son's name, clear and steady, as though Thomas had written it only yesterday. For a long moment, Eleanor just held the envelope, her fingers trembling. The last time she had spoken to Michael was months ago, a brief, stiff phone call on her birthday. Their conversations had become shorter each year, more strained, weighed down by unspoken words. She brushed her thumb across the ink, whispering, "Oh, Thomas, why didn't you ever show him this?" Finally, she slid the letter out. The paper unfolded with a soft sigh. She began to read. "My dear boy, you are only 6 years old as I write this. Tonight you are asleep in your little bed, your toy truck clutched in your hand, your hair sticking up in every direction. Someday you will be older, taller, stronger. You will forget these nights when I carry you up the stairs, when I tuck the blanket around you. But I want you to remember one thing, no matter how many years pass. You are my pride, my joy. The world will not always be kind. People will disappoint you, life will test you, but never harden your heart, Michael. Keep it soft, even when it hurts. A soft heart is not weakness, it is courage. I hope when you are a man you will still chase dreams, still laugh loudly, still forgive quickly. If ever you doubt yourself, remember this: your father loved you fiercely, and nothing you do can take that love away. Nothing." Eleanor lowered the page, her eyes swimming with tears. She could picture it vividly. Michael at 6, cheeks flushed from play, his stubborn little frown when told to eat his vegetables, the way he would fall asleep mid-sentence, toy still clutched in hand. Her voice cracked. "If only you could read this now, my son. If only you could hear his words instead of the silence we've let grow between us." She placed the letter on the table and rose slowly, walking down the hall to the room that had once belonged to Michael. The space was neat now, almost untouched. She had kept it that way, as though waiting for him to walk back in. A bookshelf still held his childhood favorites, the spines worn. A baseball glove sat on the windowsill, its leather stiff with age. Eleanor sank into the desk chair, the letter in her lap. The ache inside her grew heavier. Michael had been so close to his father. After Thomas's death he had changed, retreating into himself, speaking less, visiting rarely. Eleanor wondered if he blamed her somehow, or if the grief had simply built a wall neither of them knew how to climb. The phone sat on the nightstand, quiet, waiting. She picked it up, her thumb hovering over the buttons. She thought of calling him, of reading the letter aloud, letting Thomas's voice do what hers could not. But the fear was sharp. Fear of rejection, of silence on the other end of the line. Slowly, she set the phone down again. Back in the kitchen, she read the letter once more, her lips moving with the words. She could almost hear Thomas's voice, deep and steady, speaking to their little boy. For a moment, she imagined Michael hearing it too, the bitterness in him softening, the distance shrinking. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her heart. "I'll keep this safe, Thomas," she whispered. Someday he will read it." The wind outside howled against the windows, but inside, Eleanor sat in the glow of the lamp, the letter held tight, her heart aching with both love and longing. It was a grey morning, the kind where the sky seemed unable to decide between rain and snow. Eleanor stood at the sink rinsing a teacup when she heard it, the low growl of tires crunching over gravel. Visitors were rare at Willow Lake. Her neighbours lived far across the water, and the mailman rarely drove up the long, winding road. She wiped her hands on a towel and peered out the window. A dark sedan had pulled into the driveway, its surface streaked with road dust. The door opened, and out stepped a man she hadn't seen in nearly 3 years. Michael. Her breath caught. For a moment she thought her eyes deceived her, but there he was, broad-shouldered, taller than she remembered, his hair flecked with grey though he was only in his 40s. He carried himself with the weariness of someone who had walked through many storms. Eleanor's hands trembled against the windowsill. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, "he's here." By the time Michael knocked, she had opened the door. They stood facing each other, mother and son, with the kind of silence that feels louder than words. "Hi, Mom," he said at last. His voice was deeper, rougher than she remembered. "Michael." Her lips shaped the name slowly, tenderly. "You came." He nodded, glancing past her into the house as if unsure whether he belonged. His eyes lingered on the photographs in the hallway, the familiar scent of cedar and old books drifting from the living room. For him, it was a return to another life. For her, it was the breaking of years of emptiness. She stepped aside. "Come in." He entered, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards. Eleanor closed the door and followed him to the kitchen. The air between them was thick with unspoken things. She wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to say how much she had missed him, but the words stayed trapped in her chest. "Tea?" she asked softly. "Sure," he said, though his tone carried no warmth. They sat at the table, the kettle hissing between them like a mediator. Michael looked around the kitchen, his gaze landing briefly on the wooden box resting on the counter. "What's that?" he asked. Eleanor's hands tightened on her teacup. "It belonged to your father," she said carefully. I found letters he wrote, letters he never gave us." Michael stiffened, his jaw clenched. "Letters?" "Yes," she whispered. "For me. For you." His eyes darkened, and for a moment she thought he might leave. Instead he pushed his chair back slightly, folding his arms. Strange that he'd write instead of just saying what he meant. Guess some things never change. The sharpness in his voice cut deep. Eleanor's eyes filled, but she swallowed the pain. "He loved you, Michael. More than you ever knew." Her son looked away, staring out the window at the lake. "Love didn't keep him here, did it?" The silence after his words was heavy, filled with grief too large for either of them to carry alone. Eleanor wanted to protest, to defend Thomas, but she knew Michael's bitterness came from wounds still raw. Instead, she said softly, "Stay a few days, please. The house has missed you. I have missed you." Michael's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He looked at her then, really looked, and his expression softened just a fraction. "I'll stay for a while," he murmured. Relief flooded her chest, fragile but real. She reached across the table, her hand resting near his, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the warmth. Outside, the lake lay still, reflecting the muted sky. Inside, mother and son sat in uneasy quiet, a fragile thread of connection beginning to mend what years of silence had frayed. And though neither of them said it, both felt it. Something had shifted. The next morning came softly, with sunlight spilling through the lace curtains and scattering patterns across the floor. Eleanor had risen early, her old habit, but she moved more quietly than usual, not wanting to disturb Michael. She brewed tea, the steam curling upward, and listened to the hush of the house. Michael emerged an hour later, his hair still damp from a shower, wearing the same sweater he'd arrived in. He looked tired, though less guarded than the night before. For a while they spoke only in fragments, comments about the weather, the birds outside the window, the way the lake had frozen over near the shore. It was a fragile truce, but it was something. As Eleanor tidied the living room, her hand brushed against the corner of a shelf. A small wooden box sat there, covered in dust. She paused, her breath catching. The music box. It had been Lily's, a gift from Thomas on their daughter's 10th birthday. Eleanor hadn't seen it in years. Slowly she lifted it from the shelf and brushed away the dust. The box was carved with delicate swirls of vines and flowers. The paint faded from time. Michael noticed. "What's that?" Eleanor hesitated, her thumb tracing the lid. "Do you remember? It was Lily's. She used to wind it every night before bed. Drove you crazy sometimes." Michael's face softened with memory. He gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "Yeah, she'd play it over and over until I yelled at her to stop. Then Dad would tell me to let her be." Eleanor's chest tightened at the mention of Thomas. She opened the box gently, and the soft, tinkling melody filled the room. A simple tune, sweet and slightly melancholic, like laughter mixed with tears. Michael closed his eyes for a moment. I'd forgotten the sound. They sat together in silence, the melody weaving through the air. For Eleanor, it carried her back to evenings when Lily danced in her nightgown, twirling on the rug, her hair catching the lamplight. For Michael, it was the sound of childhood, of shared rooms, of arguments and forgiveness, of a family whole. The song ended, the last note lingering before fading into stillness. Eleanor shut the box gently. "I kept it here after she left for college. I couldn't bear to put it away. And then, when your father—" Her voice broke and she pressed the box to her chest. Michael looked at her and something shifted in his expression. He saw not just his mother, but the weight she had carried alone, the losses, the silences, the years of waiting for him. He reached out, hesitated, then placed his hand over hers on the box. "I shouldn't have stayed away so long." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence hold them both, the kind of silence that heals instead of divides. At last, she whispered, "You're here now. That's what matters." Michael gave a small nod, his eyes glistening though he blinked quickly, trying to hide it. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the wall between them begin to crack. Not shattered, not gone, but weakened enough for light to seep through. Later that day, they placed the music box on the mantel. Neither said it aloud, but both knew it belonged there, where its song could fill the house whenever they needed to remember not just what was lost, but what still remained. That evening, as the fire crackled, Eleanor caught herself humming the tune under her breath. To her surprise, Michael joined in, softly at first, then steady. Their voices, though wordless, blended in harmony, carrying the melody through the house, out toward the lake, where the ice shimmered beneath the pale winter moon. The snow had fallen heavy overnight, blanketing Willow Lake in a hush so complete that even the crows stayed silent. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, the morning light pale against the frost on the windows. In front of her lay the wooden box, the one she had carried down from the attic weeks before. She thought she had read every letter, yet as she shifted the papers to the side, a thin envelope slipped free, almost hidden beneath the lining. Her breath caught. It was sealed, the handwriting unmistakable. Thomas. But this letter was different. The envelope bore no date, only a single word written across the front. "For when you are ready." Her hands trembled. She called softly, Michael, could you come here, please? He appeared in the doorway, mug of coffee in hand, his hair still tousled from sleep. What is it? Eleanor pushed the envelope toward him. I think this is the last one. Michael set his coffee down slowly, his jaw tightening. For a moment, he simply stared at the envelope, as though it might burn him if he touched it. Finally, he reached for the paper knife, slit it open, and slid the letter free. The handwriting, familiar and firm, filled the page. Michael's lips moved silently as he read the first lines, then he stopped. You should read it, Mom. Eleanor shook her head. No. Together. So they leaned side by side, the letter trembling slightly between their hands, and began to read. My dearest Eleanor, my beloved Michael, if you are holding this, it means time has carried me where I can no longer walk beside you. But I pray you have found each other again, because that is all I ever wanted. Not perfection, not the absence of mistakes, just the unshakable knowing that love binds us tighter than silence ever could. Eleanor pressed her lips together, tears stinging. Michael swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the words. Michael, my son. I know our last words were sharp. I know I pressed you too hard, demanded too much, when all I wanted was to prepare you for a world that can be unforgiving. If I hurt you, I beg your forgiveness. You were never a disappointment to me. Not once. You carry my music, my fire, and my stubborn hope. Don't let anger bury them. Use them. Live fully. Michael's shoulders shook. He blinked rapidly, but the tears spilled anyway. I thought he died, thinking I hated him. Eleanor's hand found his, squeezing gently. Oh, Michael, no. He loved you fiercely. He always did. Eleanor, my heart, if grief has kept you company, let this be the day you set it down. You gave me a life of laughter, of children, of mornings by the lake. You gave me more than I ever deserved. Don't live in shadows for my sake. Let the house ring with voices again. Let music return. Let Michael come home to you. Eleanor could no longer read aloud. Her voice broke completely, and Michael took the page, finishing softly. And when the lake is still, when the sun dips behind the pines, know I am there, not in the silence of loss, but in the love that refuses to fade. Always yours, Thomas. The letter slipped from Michael's hand onto the table. Neither moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Michael whispered, He knew everything we would go through. Eleanor wiped her tears with the corner of her sleeve. And still, he believed in us. In this. She gestured between them, her voice trembling but strong. In family. Michael nodded, his face pale but resolute. I should have come back sooner, but maybe this is the moment he meant for us to find each other again. Eleanor reached across the table, taking his hand fully this time, not just a fleeting touch. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt the weight of her grief lift. Not gone, but lighter, carried now between two hearts instead of one. That evening, they read the letter again by the fire, the words glowing as if lit from within. The music box played softly in the background, and for the first time in years, the house by Willow Lake felt whole. The days after the letter felt different, though nothing outside had changed. The snow still lay heavy across the fields, the lake still groaned beneath its frozen surface, and the pines still stood tall and unmoved. But within the Whitmore house there was a subtle shift, like the first drip of water when ice begins to melt. Eleanor noticed it first in the silence. It was no longer sharp or heavy. It had softened like a blanket instead of a barrier. She and Michael found themselves speaking more, not in long conversations at first, but in threads of connection. Would you like some more tea? She'd ask. Sure, thanks. he'd answer, and stay in the kitchen while she poured. One afternoon, Eleanor brought out her knitting basket, the yarn rolling across the floor as she worked on a scarf. Michael sat nearby, strumming his father's old guitar. The notes were halting, uncertain at first, but the sound filled the living room with something that felt alive again. "That was your father's favorite," Eleanor said, when Michael stumbled through the chords of Danny Boy. Michael chuckled softly. "I remember him trying to teach me. I was more stubborn than patient." "You still are," Eleanor teased, a smile tugging at her lips. It felt strange and wonderful to smile at her son again. One morning Michael surprised her. He came in from outside, his cheeks flushed from the cold, carrying an armful of firewood. "Thought I'd restock the pile," he said, setting it by the hearth. Eleanor paused, hands still in the sink. "Your father used to do that every Saturday morning." Michael's eyes flickered, but this time there was no shadow in them. "Then maybe I should keep the tradition." The logs cracked as he stacked them, and Eleanor felt her chest swell with quiet gratitude. It wasn't just about firewood. It was about presence, about choosing to stay. Later that week, they decided to cook together. Eleanor pulled out her old recipe book, its pages yellowed and splattered with years of use. "Your father always loved the pot roast," she said, laying the book on the counter. Michael raised a brow. "The one you'd make on Sundays? The very one." He rolled up his sleeves. "All right, teach me." They chopped onions, peeled carrots, and laughed when Michael's eyes watered so badly he had to step away. The kitchen filled with the rich aroma of simmering broth, and Eleanor felt something she hadn't in years, a sense of family returning, not through grand gestures, but through the rhythm of daily life. When they finally sat down to eat, the first bite brought Eleanor to tears. "It tastes just like before," she whispered. Michael smiled softly. "Then we did it right." That night, the thaw deepened. They sat by the fire, the music box resting on the mantel. Michael plucked the guitar and Eleanor hummed along. At one point she leaned back, closing her eyes, and for the briefest moment she could almost hear Thomas's laughter woven into the crackle of the flames. When she opened her eyes, Michael was watching her. "You miss him every day, don't you?" "Every moment," she admitted, her voice low. "But tonight I feel like he's here, with us." Michael nodded, his gaze steady. "Me too." And in that simple exchange they both understood something profound. Grief doesn't vanish, but it changes shape. It can soften into memory, into love carried forward, into the courage to live again. By the end of the week, the lake itself began to thaw. Thin lines of water appeared near the edges, catching the reflection of the sun. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the slow release of winter's grip. Michael joined her, slipping a hand into his coat pocket. "Looks like spring's on its way," he said. "Yes," Eleanor replied, her eyes shining. "It always finds its way back." And in that moment she realized their winter was ending too. The ice had finally surrendered to the warmth of early spring. Willow Lake glimmered under the sun, its surface reflecting the budding green of the surrounding pines. Birds returned, filling the air with song, and the scent of wet earth and blooming crocuses carried a quiet promise of renewal. Eleanor stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, watching the gravel crunch under a familiar set of tires. Michael's car had pulled into the driveway, and this time he wasn't alone. Two small figures tumbled out, a boy with Michael's stubborn jawline and a girl with Eleanor's bright eyes. "Grandma!" the boy shouted before Eleanor could even greet him, running straight into her arms. The little girl followed, more tentative, her fingers curling around Eleanor's hand. Eleanor's heart swelled and tears pricked her eyes. She had not felt this kind of joy in years, the pure, unrestrained laughter of children, the warmth of tiny arms clinging to her. Michael approached slowly, watching his children reconnect with the grandmother he had missed so long. "They're yours now, Mom," he said softly, a trace of emotion in his voice. "I wanted you to know them here, where it all began for us." Eleanor squeezed his arm. "I've dreamed of this moment." Inside, the house hummed with life again. The music box sat on the mantel, its melody echoing faintly through the rooms, as Eleanor showed the children the photographs of Thomas, of Michael and Lily as young children, and of the family gathered for birthdays and holidays. "Tell me about Grandpa," the boy asked, eyes wide. Eleanor smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "He was the bravest man I ever knew. He loved fiercely, and always found a way to make life feel like an adventure, even on ordinary days." The little girl tugged at Eleanor's hand. "Was he nice to Mom?" Eleanor laughed softly. "Yes, very much. And he always adored his grandchildren, even ones he never got to meet." Michael watched them, his throat tight. He realized that for the first time in years, he was sharing not just memories, but legacy, a bridge connecting past, present, and future. After lunch, Eleanor led the children to the porch, where the thawing lake shimmered under the sun. Michael unpacked a small rowboat from the garage, and together they set it afloat. Eleanor watched as the children laughed, their voices mixing with the soft lapping of water against the hull. "This was your father's favorite thing to do," she said, pointing to the lake. "He loved the quiet, the way the water mirrored the sky." Michael nodded. "I remember. I think I understand it now. A little more." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude. The lake, the house, the music box, they were no longer relics of grief, but vessels of memory waiting to be shared. She realized that her sorrow had found a way to bloom into joy. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Eleanor and Michael sat on the porch once more, the stars reflected in the lake, twinkling as if carrying secrets of generations past. "They're beautiful," Eleanor said softly, "and so much like us, yet so different. It's wonderful to see them here, in this house." Michael leaned back, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I know, I didn't realize how much I needed this, how much I needed you." Eleanor reached for his hand. "We've been given a second chance, Michael. A chance to rebuild, to heal, to pass on what we've learned." He nodded, tears glistening. "And I won't let it slip away this time." The night air carried the faint scent of pine and water, mingling with the lingering warmth of the fire inside. Eleanor leaned back, breathing in the serenity of the moment. She realized that life, like the lake, had cycles, frozen winters followed by spring thaws, quiet years followed by laughter, loss followed by reunion. And as she watched her son and grandchildren, she felt a profound truth. Love, when nurtured and remembered, could transcend even the deepest sorrow. By the time the stars had fully emerged, the house was filled with the quiet hum of contentment. Eleanor and Michael sat side by side, their hearts lighter, their grief softened by presence and shared memory. The lake outside whispered a gentle promise. No matter how harsh the winter, spring would always return. Eleanor whispered to herself, smiling through tears, "This is where life bends, where love carries forward, and where we begin again." The morning sun painted the sky in hues of gold and rose, casting a warm glow over Willow Lake. Eleanor stood at the water's edge, the soft murmur of the thawed river reaching her ears, a gentle reminder that life, like water, never truly stops moving. Michael approached, the children skipping ahead, chasing the reflection of sunlight on rippling waves. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" she asked, curiosity mingling with anticipation. Michael smiled, a little shy. Something I thought we should do together." He knelt and unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a simple wooden bench, freshly varnished, smooth to the touch. Engraved on the back were the words, "For those who depart too soon, and the love they leave behind." Eleanor's breath caught. Her fingers traced the letters, feeling the warmth of intention. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Michael nodded. "I wanted us to remember him, and us, all in one place. A spot for reflection, for family, where the river bends." The children ran ahead laughing, their joy echoing off the water. Eleanor followed more slowly, savouring the moment. She thought of Thomas, his quiet courage, his unwavering love, his letters that had guided them back to each other. The pain of loss still lingered, but it no longer felt suffocating. It was part of a river that carried them forward. They placed the bench beneath a tall pine, the lake stretching wide before them. Michael set the music box atop the bench, its soft melody floating across the water. Eleanor and Michael sat side by side, the children at their feet, and together they watched the river curve gently, a mirror of life's twists and turns. This feels right," Eleanor said softly. "Like he's here somehow." Michael nodded, his hand brushing against hers. "He always will be. In the stories, in the laughter, in the music." Over the next hours, small acts of remembrance and love unfolded. Eleanor led the children in skipping stones, teaching them the delicate balance of timing and touch. Michael pulled his father's guitar from the porch, strumming a familiar melody. They sang together, voices blending with the rustle of leaves and the soft rush of water. Laughter mingled with tears, and tears mingled with joy. Every note, every stone cast, every whispered memory felt like a thread weaving them closer, a tapestry of life, love, and continuity. At one point, Eleanor picked up a small, smooth pebble and tossed it gently into the river. "For him," she said, and Michael followed, then the children, each stone sending ripples across the water. The river embraced them, carrying their love forward. As evening fell, the family sat on the bench, the music box winding down, the guitar quiet. Eleanor rested her head against Michael's shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine and fresh water, a scent she would always associate with home, with family, with healing. Michael spoke softly. "You know, Mom, life is funny. We can carry so much pain, so much silence, but if we let it, love finds a way back in, always." Eleanor smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "It's true. Even when we think the river is frozen, it's still flowing underneath. It always has been." They stayed that way for a long while, side by side, feeling the steady rhythm of the river, the whisper of the wind, the presence of the past, and the hope of tomorrow. The sun dipped low, painting the lake in gold and crimson. Eleanor rose, brushing snow-dusted grass from her skirt. She turned to Michael. "We'll come back here often. Bring the children. Remember. Share stories. Keep him alive in our hearts." Michael nodded. "It's the perfect way to start again. Together." As they walked back to the house, the children chattering excitedly about plans for the next visit, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She realized that life doesn't end with loss. It bends like the river, carrying grief, love, and memory onward, shaping new paths. By the lake, under the tall pine, the bench remained, a testament to a life lived fully, a love endured, and a family reborn. The river, as always, bent gently, and in that bend they found the courage to continue, carrying Thomas with them, in their hearts, in their stories, in the music, in the laughter. And Eleanor whispered, as she often did now when the lake was calm and the world seemed to pause, "It's where the river bends that we begin again."